Morality and the Good Life. Module 6. What is a moral philosophy? It's actually the search for the best way to live and the right principles for our actions. Morality is a set of principles or rules that guide us in our actions. Moral rules tell us what to do. For example, tell the truth, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, and what not to do. Don't cheat, don't kill, don't steal. The Ten Commandments from the Old Testament and in injunction to love one another from the New Testament form the core of much of the morality of our Western tradition. This is appropriately called the Judeo-Christian morality. Moral rules typically take on the form of commandments or orders, often with words that you ought to do something or ought not. Thou shalt and thou shalt not. Morality and moral rules, whether they're stated as law or not, form the basic structure of every society. They define the limits of what is not only permitted, but what is expected. The key to morality, according to the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, is duty, doing what you ought to do. The goal of moral philosophy is to develop a set of principles and a view of our aims in life that will allow us to live with clarity and confidence. This general quest, which includes morality as well as the search for the good life, is usually called ethics. In what follows, we begin with a discussion of various suggestions about this journey. Most prominent among the very early moral philosophers and philosophies is the idea of hedonism. This is the view that says the good life involves getting as much pleasure out of life as you possibly can. Perhaps the most famous philosophical hedonist in history was the Greek known as Epicurus. He lived from 341 to 270 BC. He argued that the good life was the love of pleasure, and we still refer to a person who spends his or her life for pleasure, good food, enjoyable vacations, and so forth, as an Epicurean. In fact, however, Epicurus taught that not all pleasures are good. He encouraged the simple pleasures like peace and quiet, pleasure of the mind, and fellowship with his friends. The pleasant life is not the product of one drinking party after another, or sexual intercourse, or of the seafood and all the delicacies on the luxurious buffet. On the contrary, Epicurus thought that it's the result of sober thinking. Asceticism. This is the proper word for the life of simplicity and self-denial. It's about as opposite from hedonism as you can get. Even before Christianity, around the time of Socrates, there was a group of philosophers who called themselves cynics. They defended this similar lifestyle of simplicity. The most famous of them was a gentleman named Diogenes. He lived in a bathtub, literally, and owned nothing but a single lantern, with which he is said to have searched the faces of everyone, looking for even one honest man. One day Alexander the Great came to his city and asked to see Diogenes, of whom he had heard much. On their meeting, Alexander asked Diogenes, "What can I do for you?" And Diogenes turned to the ruler of most of the known world and simply told him, "Move over, you're blocking the sunlight." The life of seeking success does have its problems. There's always the real possibility of failure, of course, but there is equally an argument against almost every lifestyle. In any case, the threat of failure is not a good reason to reject a certain lifestyle. The problem is rather the threat of success. We all know stories of successful people in their mid-40s or 50s who commit suicide, just when it would seem that they've achieved what they've been working for most of their lives. Why? Because once earned, their success proved not to be what they wanted after all. The good life. If a certain conception of the good life fails us, that doesn't mean there is no good life, much less that life isn't really worth living. It does not even mean that success is not worth having or that success is wrong. It only means that success by itself does not seem to give us the good life. Freedom. This can be singled out as a separate idea of the good life. Some of the other most common conceptions of the good life are close to those we have discussed so far, like the pursuit of great wealth or political power, a success ethic. The religious conception of the good life also deserves consideration, not when it is simply intermingled with other goals and ambitions and squeezed into Sunday mornings, but when it's truly the goal of life to which all other goals are subordinated, when people really practice what they preach. Happiness. It's not just a sense of well-being. Did you know that happiness for Aristotle meant the good life? He thought of it as an integrated life with all the virtues and good fortune and philosophical wisdom to appreciate it. Happiness is nothing less than an entirely good life with all its parts in balance. Indeed, Aristotle told us it made no sense at all to say that a person's happy for just a few hours or even days. A person can only call himself happy on the basis of his entire life, according to Aristotle. To Aristotle, happiness required this lifetime of good living. Part of this might be attributed to a difference in his language. Aristotle used the word eudaimonia, which more accurately means doing well and well-being. Egoism is the thesis that everyone acts for his or her own advantage. Altruism, that is acting for the sake of other people's interest. The most familiar and difficult question of this psychological egoism is it true that people only act for their self-interest? There's this famous story about Abraham Lincoln, and it's an apt illustration of this question. Was he an egoist or an altruist? Once upon a time, Abraham Lincoln and his friend were in a carriage, and they were passing a mudslide. Abe Lincoln saw the mother pig squealing as her little piglets were drowning. Lincoln stopped that carriage and saved those piglets, and then he moved right on. His friend asked him whether that wasn't just a clear case of altruism, doing good for another. Lincoln replied, "Why, no, I believe in egoism. That was the very essence of selfishness. I should have had no peace of mind all day if I had gone on and left that suffering old sow worrying over those piglets. I did that simply to get peace of mind, don't you see?" You see, many of our actions are based on self-interest, but they really aren't selfish. But are there actions that are not based on self-interest? Lincoln's response is an excellent example, because it would seem as if his action is not for selfish reasons at all. He was helping the pig. Yet according to him, it was selfish. He did it just for his own peace of mind. This could be argued for just about everything. Then there are the theories of morality that are formulated to answer questions of interpretation and justification. What is it for a principle to be a moral commandment in the first place? Do we need to call to a higher standard, to an orderly society, Do we need just to please God not to have our city destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah? For example, if the commandment is not to kill, according to the theory that morality is a set of principles imposed on us by God, then the interpretation of that principle must be filled out. Do we need to appeal to the current authorities, such as the Pope or the Church in general? Or the other side, maybe these moral principles are taken into efficient guides that promote human happiness and general welfare. Then the law against killing is interpreted and defended, that showing if we all obey to not killing, then more people are happier, fewer people are miserable than if there were no such law. Immanuel Kant insisted that morality, whatever else it might be, is first of all a matter of reason and rationality. We might learn them as children. He called this autonomy, which means that every one of us is capable of figuring out what is right and what is wrong on his own, without appeal to external authorities like the Pope or the Church or others. We just use our faculty of reason. But this does not mean that morality is whatever we decide it to be. His reason is an authority that seems to be in us. It is objective, and it prescribes universal and necessary laws and duties, according to Kant. Utilitarianism was formulated by 18th and 19th century British philosophers and social thinkers. Jeremy Bentham was one. John Stuart Mill was another. Utilitarianism looks at morality as a goal-oriented theory. It places all of the emphasis on the actual consequences of the moral rules, and it insists that they be justified only by appeal to how happy they make us and other people. The goal of morality, according to these two men and almost all other utilitarians, is simply to make people happy, to give them pleasure, and to spare them from pain. Bentham went so far as to develop a mathematical formula called the happiness calculus, to calculate how any action can determine the pleasure or pain and thus be moral or immoral. He considered a number of factors, as you see on this chart, such as how intense and how lasting a pleasure or pain could be, how certain it was that we would attain, how quickly the results would it be ongoing, and the extent to which pleasure and pain may even be mixed. The content of ethics and morality seem to mean different things to different philosophers. Some say ethics are relative to the situation. Others say ethics are absolutes. Moral relativism is the thesis that there are no universal and essential morality. The morality is just relative to a particular society or its people. Moral absolutism says that there are definitely universal and essential moral values. If some societies or people do not accept these universal views, then they are just immoral. Well, you can see there's many differences between us, of course. Some are just superficial. For instance, the differences in customs, etiquette, dress, table manners. However, some differences are profound, such as in religion and philosophy. Yet most cultures do manage to coexist with others whose beliefs are startling different. It's a matter of tolerance. Study hard this week.